What a way to end what I hope has been a very interesting day for all of you. I've got some fantastic sessions, and I hope you all have. What better way to end than with all the world's a stage, with some fabulous speakers. My background has always been in theater. I studied theater and I worked in theater all the way through university. And my first job was running a theater company in Delhi, in India. Till my father-in-law, I met my wife in TAG, our theater company, and my father-in-law asked me, so what do you do? And I said, I do theater. So he said, no, so what's your day job? So I said, I do theater, I run a theater company. So he said, young man, you have to support my daughter. And I said, hang on there, that wasn't part of the deal. She runs a big firm, she's supposed to be supporting me. We sorted this out, and he was not happy at all. Not happy, not pleased. I then had to go out and get a job. Luckily, television opened up, etc. And I'm going to come to theater as a career choice in a bit, but let me just first introduce our fabulous speakers today in no particular order, but I'm going to start with Anush Irani, who's from Canada. He's written some wonderful plays as well as novels. I encountered Anush, I think, in 2009 or 8 or 7. Bumped into him in a very boozy bar in Vancouver, which is when I discovered some of his fabulous books, which I then deep dived into. And if any of you have time or patience, please pick them up. The most recent one is something called The Parcel. Absolutely incredible piece of writing about the Hijra, our transgender community, which is called the Hijras in India, and it's out there. Incredible story which will move you no end. He's done a number of plays which have been performed off-Broadway, on Broadway. His last one on cricket opened in Toronto, won great audiences, not necessarily great reviews. Bombay Black is still running right now in Vancouver, and you're on the verge of writing yet another play which will hopefully open in 2018. I'm not even going to read out the number of awards that he's been given. You can read it in the biodata. It'll take me at least half an hour to go through the awards. So Anush, thank you for being here. I'm his great fan. The first time that I landed in Boulder, Colorado, and I was able to survive this car jackknifing episode with Maruta. That evening I went to see a play, and whose play was it but Ami Dayan's play, in which Maruta was acting out at the dairy, was it? The Betrayal? No,
that was called Reason.
The Reason. And I was like, wow, who is this person? Ever since then we've been sort of eating together, we cook together when I come to Boulder, and I've been able to delve deep into his playwright skills. Again, he's written a whole slew of wonderful plays which have been performed both here on Broadway. He won Best Actor at some point of time for a play in Broadway, right?
Just off-Broadway.
Off-Broadway. So thank you, Ami, very much for being here. I'm not going to introduce Kehan Irani at all, because you must have at least caught her today in 2 sessions. Anybody here in this room hasn't heard her introduction?
You can read.
Terrible. You haven't been to any sessions. You've been in 4 already. Kehan is an Emmy Award-winning writer and producer. She's a socially engaged artist. She creates arts projects and events to build community and engages audiences in social justice issues. She was one of the 10 artists named by President Obama as the champion of change. The last year of his being in office. She's again written a slew of plays. So thank you very much for being here. With us this evening is actually the person who was supposed to be moderating this session before I got dragged in, which is the editor-in-chief of Hindu. Hindu is the big publication in India. It's a national publication based out of Chennai, down south. It seemed to be of great intellectual heft. It's also one of the few newspapers that still continues to have a sizable arts page or an arts section. These are very few and far in between right now in most parts, certainly in our part of the world. He's been the champion of that particular segment, apart from now being the chief editor-in-chief. He also was responsible for setting up the Hindu Theatre Festival. He's been on the jury of our supposed national awards, which is the Meta Awards, which we run, and we're delighted to have Mukund here as well. So I'm going to start straight off by saying, you know, the three of you, you've been writing novels and plays. Should you have only been a playwright, would it have afforded you a living?
No. Not my background and where I come from. So I'm not independently wealthy. My family doesn't have a lot of wealth, and so I have to sustain myself. And even in New York City, and even in the diverse, vibrant art scene that exists there, commercial is one thing. Commercial that gets money and that brings in lots of ticket sales is different than the type of theater that I make, which is really politically and socially housed. It comes out of movements and issues that are happening now. My hope is that it'll engage people in movements and bring them back into how do I connect into grassroots movements. And that's not something that capitalism is going to laud with money, you know. So it hasn't, but the rewards are outside of money. And I did try to go to business school. I tried. I left, and it was very funny because I was in high school and I was applying for college, and I told my mother, no, I'm not going to do theater and arts anymore. I'm going to do business. And God bless my mother. She said she would just like push these little applications to conservatories to me. Just consider. So she knew me very well, and I said, no, I'm going to do something different. And look how that turned out.
So did you ever tell her that no, she shouldn't be writing plays and for theatre, etc.?
Never did. In fact, encouraged her.
Fantastic. Ami, you moved to Boulder, Colorado, and you're primarily a playwright, and that's the nature of your business model. Tell us a little bit about when you moved here. What were the challenges that you found? What was it like moving from a big city all the way to a place like Boulder, and how does this support this particular passion of yours?
Well, first I moved from Tel Aviv, and I will say that in Tel Aviv, the art scene, and particularly the theater scene, actually does have a viability. And actors and directors, and I'm mostly a director really, adapt a little, or adapt more than I write, and also write. So people can make a living in the arts, in the theater arts in Israel. It's a place that has the most theater per capita in the world, largely because we just saw an amazing take on socialism, communism. What happens in Israel, actually, what remained of a socialist philosophy created a grid so that every little village, no matter where it is, has a budget that if it doesn't use, it loses. That allows plays to be brought there at the expense of the government and the taxpayer for every age and every, so it's quite amazing actually in that regard. And in that regard, coming here, I came here for 1 year, 18 years ago, so that my wife could study yoga with a very special teacher who is with us today. And it's taken a long time to study. Part of the reason, though, has to do that we also had a girl of 1 year old when we came here, and so the decision to stay was not at all related to business or to fiscal issues. It had to do with parenting, raising your child in a place of sanity, and that has worked out very well. From a professional perspective, I had to make up what I was going to do, and I got some advice that I needed to act again and put my face, get some face recognition, and then make it to New York somehow. So I basically took a play that in Israel I adapted and directed somebody else in way back in '94, and the play is still playing to this day there, and I performed here, and that was able to bring that play from here to Denver to Edinburgh and eventually to New York, and that helped.
Wow.
I'm going to come back to some of the Israel story, but let me move on to Anush for a second. Anush, again, Vancouver, not your home. You moved there. Can you tell us what motivated you to move to Vancouver and how you began writing there, and you continue to use that as your primary base for writing? But all your material, first and foremost, still comes from what you call back home, which is India, which in a sense is also an adopted home.
No, absolutely. And I moved to Canada when I was 24 with the intention of becoming a writer. The only problem is that I hadn't written anything. I had a full-time job in an advertising agency, and I just left with this feeling that I could write. And I remember on the plane, I had a mini anxiety attack for this very reason that I hadn't written. But there was this sense of adventure, and what Canada did for me was it gave me isolation, and it doesn't sound like a gift, but it was, because in Bombay I had such a full life. Canada afforded me the distance and the perspective and the ability to reflect. Having said that, I did not realize how much of India is in my DNA. You don't realize until you actually leave. And in Bombay, I grew up very close to Kamadipura, which is the red light district. And apart from missing home and family and the food, I suddenly started, thinking about the Hijra community, the pimps, the sex workers, and that sort of fueled the writing for me.
Kian, all three of you, in a sense, are migrants in every sense of the word, and each of you come with your stories of your people, of the trees and the rivers and the stones and the rocks and everything. Being away, or that distance, has that distance got anything to actually, to fuel this outpouring of literature?
I don't feel so. I think it is a way that I can connect actually into that history. I immigrated at such a young age that I don't have a memory of India. I don't have my parents also lived in Iran. I don't have a memory of Iran. But writing and imagination and creativity can help me to think about how did our community survive over time, because Anush and I are both from the Parsi community, which are Iranian refugees to India. And my grandparents were directly Iranian immigrants into India. And so thinking about, well, how did these Iranian refugees change into Indians, right? And then how does this group of Indians change into whatever we are in America? And it's very strange. I talked in my other thing about shape-shifting, like what someone is projecting on me suddenly becomes this garb that I have to dance with or move with or try to get out from under, and so I'm very fascinated in my writing with how people negotiate the conditions that they're put in or that they are faced with, and then how do they negotiate their identity and their family's news story out of that. And so my latest piece was going back to India, researching actually the embroidery traditions of the Parsis, and looking at how did this embroidery tradition start in Iran and continue and change in India, and how does that story relate to how we changed and became Indian. Because if you talk to Parsis, they say they're Indian, they very much identify with India. Yet there was a time when they probably didn't. There was a time where they probably thought this food is weird, and what language are you speaking, and why do I have to wear this thing? But my dress is a sari. This is Gujarati shawl. I'm wearing a Nehru collared jacket, and so how did these Iranians become so Indian? And then how do I take that identity and translate it in a totally different context, where growing up in New York City, everyone thought I'm Puerto Rican. This is Puerto Rican girl.
Mukund, Kian talked about identity. Even 15, 16 years ago in India, there was very little original writing in English. There was a lot in some of the other languages. Both the Maharashtrian, the Marathi plays and the Bengali plays were very rich and fertile, and of course that then disappeared. What's the scene in, say, Chennai and Bangalore specifically when it comes to theatre? Is there a lot of outpouring of new talent? Is issues like identity or migration addressed? Is it still bedroom comedies? Where are we? Will you set the stage for us?
You're talking about writing in English. Well, one of the things we have done since 2008 is to have a playwright award, which is given every year to the best unperformed and unpublished script in English. And there's a sum of 200,000 rupees for the winning script, which is a decent incentive given the fact that publishers are extremely reluctant to, even publish scripts, even for free. So we did this to sort of support or to get playwrights recognized. This year, we had 244 entries of uneven quality, admittedly, but some of it was pretty good. So we've found in recent years lots of young people who are experimenting and writing interesting stuff, pushing the envelope. So it's not bedroom comedies at all. It's in fact very political, most of it. Not all of it has to do with identity necessarily, but there's sort of sharp political satires, interesting, very interesting thematically and rich. Sometimes the play is based on a Shakespearean character. Sometimes it's based on a mythological Indian situation. So we get all kinds of scripts, and we've had many winners. We've hived off one set of scripts into a Penguin book, and we've also tied up with an e-publishing company to get. We put some 14 scripts, plays shortlisted or winners onto the site. Because one of the problems in India, I'm not sure how it works outside, is it is extremely difficult to get published. I mean, I can count the number of people writing plays in English who can actually find a publisher. Most of them just don't find one. So our attempt was to try and help and push this along in some way.
Anush, do you want to answer that question about publishing? How, you're, I think, 5 plays down?
4.
4 plays down. Have you found publishers easily? And at what point does the publisher come in? Does the play get to stage first and then you find the publisher? What's your process, your specific process?
In Canada, I mean, there's a very solid theatre community, and there's a system in place which is great. There's an organization, the Canada Council for the Arts, which is also very supportive of theatre and literature. With me, what normally happens is, you either get commissioned to write a play. So, for example, a theatre company will approach me and they'll ask me to write a play specifically for them. But in most cases, what I do is I just write the play first, and then I go to a theatre company. We develop it, we do readings, then I do another draft. It really goes through a long process. Then we get to doing a public reading for the theatre company and the artistic director to sometimes just get a sense of what the audience is. Especially with my work, because it's set in Bombay, and it's initially that I wrote this play 15 years ago, which is set in a brothel in Bombay. And for Canadian audiences, it was, but the artistic director really backed me up and took a risk. Once it's produced, only then is it published. So the challenge is not the publication. The challenge is getting the play produced and making sure it's developed with the right theatre company, with the right actors.
Published without.
In some cases, but I think that's changing now. I think a couple of publishers are sort of publishing scripts even though they haven't been produced. But in many cases, in most cases, I would say, we don't publish a script until it's actually been produced.
And one of the purposes of that is actually also the playwright then workshops the process through, and then you get a far more complete form after the first run. But Ami, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the few plays that you workshopped here and then in its completed form it's transferred, and then you've revived it again.
The process that you were kind of describing about having a draft, having a reading, having another draft, having another reading, public presentation, workshop, and so on has been that I have utilized that same methodology, and I do think this is more or less the case in America as well. That the more successful you are, the less help you need. Groucho Marx, I think, said that a bank is an institution that will give you any amount of money if you can prove that you don't need it. That's how the publishing world works with plays.
Ami, hang on to the mic. You talked about politics and political theater. In Tel Aviv, for example, whether it's at the Camry or if you did something with dance theater at Susan Dalal Center or wherever, would you be able to put together a political play which was overtly anti the narrative at that point of time? And how did you deal with that while you were there?
Okay, I'm a small fish in that. There are giants of the theater in Israel, including Hanoch Levin, who right after the '67 war wrote the Queen of the Bathtub, I suppose is the translation of its title, which basically described that as the end of Israel if you don't morally, do a U-turn. And the amount of outlash that came out was just incredible. So, and that has been going on. Aleph Bet Yehoshua did, in the 70s, did a lot of shows in Haifa that got the same kind of attitude. And in one way, it got a lot of press, but the anger around it has gone,
Actually, at one point, if you did anything else but Fiddler on the Roof, you got the attitude of the backlash. But
well, I don't know if I would go that far, but certainly in current day, there's a whole movement of my best friends are involved with signing a petition that would not collaborate with any production that's being held in the West Bank, any of the settlements that are beyond the Green border, and there's persecution. There's to the extent, including my mother-in-law is on a blacklist, where people identify where she's performing or where these people are performing, including David Grossman, a writer, who was in JLF, that they're helping the public actually, for lack of a better word, bully them. So to be an artist that keeps this kind of a moral code in Israel, it has its consequences.
Each of you write a lot of political theater. Most of your work is, very political in essence. In recent times, has there been a backlash? Have you had to do self-censorship? What is the process when it gets to stage? Have you had worries about the kind of work that you have had to write?
I think it always depends on the institution, and so when you're thinking about this process, as many of folks have talked about, you workshop it. You're workshopping it with a theater company or a group of actors and artists, and so how they're, who they want to protect, and generally they want to protect the board of directors and their members. And so there was very interesting, actually, a young woman recently in New York did a report on the politics of the board of directors of many of the big cultural institutions in New York, Met Museum and so on, and looked at pretty much their far-right leanings and who they've given money to, really. And so when you think about that, certainly very overt political things similar to what you're talking about will not happen at all, or will, through the workshopping process kind of be subverted and channeled. Oh, well, why don't you have this character say this, or have this, tone this one down. Which does happen. A play does change through the workshopping process, hopefully from the writer's perspective for the better, for becoming more, cohesive and a thing that you wanted it to be. But sometimes, depending on, listen, do I want a certain level of production in my work? Then there's certain things I'll have to consider about the type of work I can do and which will be received in these spaces. And that's for each person to figure out. Maybe, you know, I was saying something that, you know, I'll sell out for Lincoln Center. You know, like, okay, you know, I might not do it for this off-Broadway production, but, you know, if it's Lincoln Center, sure, you know, tell me what you want me to do, you know, I'll think about it. And each writer really does have to think about the institution. Who are they collaborating with in communication with around this production?
Mukund, you know, at the Hindu festival, I mean, given today that there's such a lot of political action. We've just seen Gauri Lankesh's murder. Ever since Safdar Hashmi was killed in the early 80s, Safdar Hashmi was a theater activist, a street theater activist, left-leaning party, part of the card-carrying communist, in a sense, which is quite different from the communists in this part of the world. There has been some amount of pushback, but in the Indian languages, whether it's Malayalam or Kannada or Telugu, there has been a huge swell of new writing, which is very political, very astute, and they get away with attacking a particular concept or idea through wit, through mime. Have you seen that growing? And when you stage work or select work at the Hindu festival, do you have to be careful?
No, we don't have to be careful. In fact, we are increasingly, I mean, we've got this reputation of being an English language theatre festival, but we basically stage any kind of theatre as long as it's not entirely text based. I mean, if it is performed, so we've staged theatre in Korean, we've staged theatre in Manipuri, in Punjabi, and in Malayalam, and all of that. So as long as there is a universality to it, and not people sitting around a dining table and just having a conversation, which would be incomprehensible to anyone who didn't understand the language, then it's all right. But I think what's happening, and this is, I think, related to what you were saying, is we are getting, I'm seeing this, an increasing number of people in India, and I'm not sure whether this is happening in the same fashion or to the same degree elsewhere. Lots of people who direct theatre saying, look, I don't need a text to work with, I'm just going to do it through improvisation. So the playwright is someone who, is not vanishing from the stage, but I see more and more productions which are just, born through a process of improvisation. And there is almost a kind of directorial conceit in doing that. Look, I've done this thing. I'm not basing myself on someone else's work. And I think it's not such a bad thing to have this experiment, but if it just crowds out text, or if it just crowds out other forms of theatre, then I think that's something that we have to look with. And sometimes when I see this, this collaboration that you talk about, that you workshop, you're workshopping with someone else. This is not necessarily, it's not like an editor. It's almost like someone telling you, look, this is going to work, and this may not work in some way. So I just wonder how much of compromise somebody makes in this process, and whether that is always necessary. In the old days, you just wrote your script. It was up to someone to do something, or tease something out of it, or interpret it in the way you want. It wasn't a collaborative process that actually defined the production.
So Anush, how do you write? I mean, do you lay out all the characters in your head? How do you get the different voices? Because finally, when it comes to theatre, it's not just about setting the scene, it's actually enacting it and visualizing that this is going to perhaps be what it looks like with stage directions if you're a didactic a playwright. What's your process?
My starting point in many cases has been a single image. So I'd written a play called Bombay Black, which is a love story. It's theatrical, don't worry.
Yes.
Beautiful setting now.
Bombay Black.
Bombay Black is a love story between a blind man and a dancer. And I got the idea for it with a single image of this young woman performing a dance in an apartment by the Arabian Sea, Colaba in Bombay. And one day a blind man shows up. He pays to watch her dance. Now, why would a blind man pay to watch a woman dance? So sometimes with an image, there's a question embedded in that image, and that's all I really have. And I just follow that image. And also touching upon what Mukund said, in Canada at least, I've been lucky that I've worked with really good dramaturgs. So just as a novel has an editor, a play has a dramaturg, and that is your one person that you have that bond with. So when you do the public readings, when you do the workshops, when you have actors read your work, I want to hear the play, but then I will work with just one person on feedback. Nothing else matters to me, to be honest, unless it's the artistic director, in which case again I have a very good relationship. And I've never been asked to change things. In some cases I've been asked for more clarity, and in some cases I've actually felt that it's too clear. So sometimes clarity is not good either. Sometimes you have to, move things into the shadows. And that's what you really look for.
Maybe this is the best time to get each of you to do a quick short reading, and I think you've got Matka King, so if you can start. And
I'll just tell you very briefly what this play is about. So this was the first play that I wrote 15 years ago or so. And it's set in Kamatipura, which is Bombay's red light district. And it's the story of a hijra, a transgendered person named Top Rani, who runs an illicit lottery called Matka from his brothel. Now, in many cases in the Hijra community, in most cases rather, I should say that they feel they are female souls trapped in a male body. But in this case, when Top Rani was a young boy, he worked as a servant boy, and his master had sort of sold him into a life of slavery, and he had been castrated against his will. So the section that I'm going to read is a... No, I'll be okay. No. Thank you. I'll be okay. No problem. Thanks. And so in this section, he's on stage, and he still identifies as a he. And he's holding something that's very similar to this. In India, it's used to grind masalas. It's something it's shaped like a phallus, but it's used to grind masalas. And it's very dark. He has long hair, he's wearing a sari, and he has bangles around his wrist. You see this thing? It is used to grind masalas. You place a thick slab of stone on the ground. You put the masala on that slab and sit on your haunches. You grind the masala to a paste. It is hard work. You rock back and forth, and your limbs ache from squatting. But you do it because you are a servant boy, and it is what you are meant to do. But that does not mean you cannot think of other things while you are doing it. Of cricket, and how you run away when you break someone else's window pane. That is what gives the masala its flavor. The thoughts of the person at the time of grinding. If you think about dead people, the masala will taste stale. If you are homesick for your village, the masala will taste bittersweet. And your master cannot understand how the masala tastes different every time because the ingredients never change. But this is now a part of me. It's almost midnight. Odd time to be doing all this natak. Odd time, no? Odd time to be woken from your sleep to see eyes shining in the dark. Odd time for you to be dragged by people you don't know into your master's kitchen. Odd time for you to hear them say, "You will no longer be a man." My hands are tied, my mouth is gagged. I cannot see their faces because it is dark, but I can see eyes. They all have long hair and wear saris. They hold oil lamps in their palms and circle round and round like an offering. They remove my shirt. As they take my shirt, the bangles on their wrist. Then they sit on my chest so I cannot move. I see their dark faces. They have color on their lips, all red. In the center of the forehead, a bindi. They tear my short pants. They turn me around and put this delightful object inside me. I pass out from the pain of this, so I do not feel the pain of. When I open my eyes again, it is midnight. They all shout, "You are pure, you are cured." Where there should be the mark of a man, there is mud to heal the wound, to stop the bleeding. They put mud behind also, to heal the wound, to stop the bleeding. Mud, like trees grow from. They take the man from me and give me mud in return. Mud.
From memory?
It's from my solo show, and I haven't performed it in a long time, but I'll just do a bit of a character that everyone loves. I'm going to use it. Thank you. Yeah. All right. So, let's see. Sorry. The telephone is ringing. Hello? What? I am sorry, sir, I can't hear you. Can you please speak slower? Uh-huh. What? Which mosque will be burned? My mosque? Oh, no. Sorry, sir. Wrong number. This is not mosque. This is temple for Sikh religion. Yes. We are all Sikh peoples. No, sir, hello. No. All Muslims are not Sikh peoples. Only Sikh peoples are Sikh. Muslims are Muslims. There is difference. But why you say this? Why you want to burn us? Please, sir, hello. We have nothing to do with Saddam Hussein. No, not Osama bin Laden either. Different turban. We are Sikh people.
I'm unprepared, so I'm just going to throw tiger. Okay, I think I need this. When we came down from Manchuria with the 4th Army, the 8th Army, and virtually the entire 7th Army, we were thousands of us shuffling, moving along, marching by day and by night. We were loaded with packs and baggage, filthy and worn out, but we struggled on. And our horses died. And we ate our horses. And we ate our mules too, when they died. And when we had nothing left to eat, we ate dogs, cats, lizards, rats. You can just imagine the dysentery. We crapped so much down that road that I bet you that to this day, and for centuries to come, that is where you will find the tallest, greenest grass in this whole wide world.
Mukund, will incredible power of storytelling. Theatre, in its very essence, continues to be one of the most powerful ways of communication. Back home, we have the Ramayana and the Ram Leelas that happen in the street corners. Across the world, this is still seen to be the primary source of telling a story. You tell us a little bit about how this power can, in a sense, be harnessed, or has it been harnessed? Can it be harnessed?
I don't think it's been harnessed enough, at least back home. I mean, you mentioned Hashmi, you mentioned street theatre. When I was in college, we had, during the emergency times, we had little impromptu things break out. I don't see much of that happening anymore. I mean, the sort of energy that you had, a few decades ago, you don't see it out on the street, at least. I think the very few institutions working at the grassroots level, one of them I can think of is Ninasam in Hegadu, which actually works on the basis of equal partnership with ordinary farmers and people who've just not been exposed to theatre before, tries to draw them in and make the tradition a little wider. Otherwise, they still, even the traditional arts, I mean, they're pockets of insular pockets or elitist pockets and so on. I think we failed to translate theatre into a kind of broader movement. At least that's my sense. I have a sense that when I was a student it was a little more out there than it is now.
I don't know if you want to comment on,
Well,
is it changing?
is theatre changing in? You know, I don't. What's changing is. I just want to say, in fact, that what's electrifying about theatre is that it's so dangerous, that it can go so wrong, and that is its most challenging part. On opening night, I'm a wreck. Not because I don't believe in the work, but I know that the work can change. And in theatre, even a slight variation, you lose the rhythm, you lose the pacing, you get derailed for a long time and takes you a while to come back. And I think knowing how difficult it is, people automatically try to say, okay, you know what, I'm not working with a classic structure, I'm not really going for this effect, or because you can't, it's difficult. That's the reason you try and experiment. But it is one of those things where when you get it right, it reveals to us in a very deep way what it is to be human. And I think storytelling, oral storytelling plays, there are moments when the stage is on fire. And that is for what we look for in plays. The challenge in a play is, unlike a novel, it is very difficult to reveal the inner life of a character. And that's something I've seen a lot of playwrights struggle with. They get so carried away with story and plot that you end up seeing caricatures on stage or not fully formed beings. So I think it's that has always been the challenge. So I don't see the change in that sense.
Karan, once you write, do you just hand over your material, or do you own it till the very bitter end?
I don't know what you mean.
Meaning, once you finish writing, do you hand it over to a director, or how do you see the finished product? Are you very much party to it, or do you then step back and say?
No, I'm very much party to it. And the good thing about theater, as opposed to something like TV or film, is that the writer really, as you were talking about, that's slightly changing and concerning you, the writer really is the person that the director, and everyone is like, is that okay? Is this correct? Someone is always checking back in with the writer. And with, as you know, sometimes with film, with TV, I mean, the writer hands over the rights, and it's like, I can completely change your story to the point that it was not at all your story. In fact, maybe the antithesis of what you were hoping the effect of your story would be. But there are these types of theaters which are very interesting. I mean, it's interesting to me because I work. So for me, I like the theater world, and it's a place where I feel comfortable and I love. But I really do believe that there are so many more people and groups of people interested in theater that exist in what's called the theater world, that have representation or that feel welcomed in the theater world. And so I'm so interested in cultivating theater in the world. I'm interested in how people will express their creativity and tell stories and embody those stories in places that are not theatrical. So in a grassroots community-based organization, or in a political organization, or in a social issue organization. How would they use their creativity and make theater to talk about something that's of interest, that creatively shows story, that brings their community to life? That's what really interests me. And in that setting, it's a completely different dynamic, and it is what you talked about. It's called devised theater, and it's the idea that we are all collaborators, and our voice and our stories are going to be represented in a different way. And there's a director who is bringing cohesion to the story, but is not forcing one interpretation. But that's an entirely different context than a theater world context. It's an entirely different context where it's about what is the function, what are we doing here, and how is it going to activate something outside of this room in a very real situation that we want to move forward.
Ami, you wear both hats because you both write as well as you direct, you produce, you occasionally act. How do you make the compartments, or do you make the compartments, or do you go from one to the other? What's your process?
I'd say all of the hats are fine except for the producer. The producer is...
The money.
The money, and that whole mindset is very strange to me. I have to really focus on and going to another room and thinking from that perspective. Between actor, director, and oh, thank you. They have great collaboration. The writer in me would love to. I'd very much like it when actors go off script, and I a lot of times steal from or incorporate what they bring. As a director, certainly I have a draft in my head. I have an idea for a scene for how it would look, but I would encourage the actors to go off of that. And most of the time, I would kind of follow their lead. So the artistic side is on one side, but producing is, you should know, it's a whole other thing. Exactly that.
Before I open it up, Anush, when you start writing your play, do you have it all laid out, beginning till end? You know what the ending is going to be, and unlike a novel where you tend to let the characters sort of take their own life, and you're not sure where you're going to land up unless you're Vikram Seth and you've already laid it out on your wall. Do you sort of actually plan it through? I mean, this particular new play that you wrote?
Not really. I mean, the process of writing is similar, whether it's a novel or a play. In many cases, I have an idea of how it's going to end, but by the time I get to the end, I'm somewhere else. So I just have the ending as, okay, this is where I might go. That's the direction. And really, it's about building relationships. You go from its architecture. I mean, two of my favorite playwrights. One is Arthur Miller. If you look at his work, you can't break it down. No matter how much you shake it, it won't crumble. And then there's Tennessee Williams, who's so poetic, and there's so much beauty in just moments. There are moments in a Tennessee Williams play where it's not just the language, but his vision is so poetic that he takes us to those deepest, darkest corners of, again, what it means to be human. And that's what I look for. I look for those moments, and I look for where can I go deeper into the internal world of these characters. And I think if you do that well enough, the ending will reveal itself, and it might be in a completely different direction.
You mentioned earlier this image. Does that change, or is that your compass?
The image is the starting point. If I change the image, then I abandon the play.
Yeah. Loyal to the image, not necessarily to the plot.
It's not about staying loyal even, it's just that I don't start writing until I've lived with that image for at least a year. So I know it's compelling enough, I know it's growing. There's no way I can abandon it.
A quick comment from each of you. My own sense, I travel the world, and wherever I go, I see work, I see plays, I see a lot of...
I think I should say here that, this man runs, I think, one of the most extraordinary theatre festivals in the country, which brings together a sort of plays in diverse languages and actually gives them a kind of national platform and recognition. So I think it'd be just unfair if you don't tell us something about...
Today it's not about me, so I'm going to come back to that.
His wife does amazing.
Yeah, so this is like a conversation. So question.
Like they said, there is a theatre festival that we started 12 years ago, basically because we felt that platforms are very important to create the opportunity for diverse voices to find a space. And this particular platform came about because we said there are platforms for different languages in India, but there's no one platform across languages. And when we're trying to create a national award, we felt it was very important to create across languages, so therefore that platform originated. But the other part of the story is that, the other hat that I wear is I run a charity for street children, for kids who run away from home. And much of our work with them, and today it started 30 years ago with 23 kids and 2 staff. Today we look after about 9,500 kids a year with 250 staff. And much of our work is through the arts, through theatre, music and dance, because we believe and we feel and we've seen that what theatre does and what the arts does is allows for each of these people who have not known an identity to find and discover their own identity and find and discover their own voice and find and discover the fact that it's like one of the kids said to me at the end of his performance in our annual play, said that for the first time people were listening to me as me. And most of these kids who come through our system, because of the arts today, have become hugely successful in their own right. And of course, every time they come and tell me, bhaiya, which means brother, or we're going to follow your footstep, I'm going, shoot him and shoot me. Bad example. Go away. Go to do engineering or whatever it is. But those of them who actually stick to it have done amazingly. But coming back, last comment before I open it up, very quickly. My sense, and traveling the world and seeing so much of work, and a lot of the work that I see is really horrible. But yeah, really awful stuff. But that time when the curtain goes down and you've seen the most incredible talent, and that stops your heart and fills your soul and elevates your mind. My sense is that one is seeing much more and more of theatre happening, original, exciting, new spaces in different parts of the world. And I just want each of you to make a comment on that.
Whether the most exciting work is happening in more traditional versus more innovative ways?
Is there more work happening? Is there more talent that's coming out? Is there more platforms for theatre and for the arts?
Well, actually, getting back to the authenticity that you were talking about with because I saw a show that your wife directed, with these street people, and that kind of excitement is not something that you can get in the professional world. That being said, when you see Ian McKellen deliver a Shakespeare piece, there's a sense that that it's today, that it's right here, that it's right now. So it really has to do with this recognition of the moment, this capacity to capture the moment, and the kids have it. They just have it. The best acting coaching that I received was from Herbert Berkoff, HB Studios in New York, and he basically said to the class, "I cannot teach you how to act, but perhaps we can remind ourselves how it felt as a child to play on the beach on a sunny day, and if we can bring back some of that excitement and fun and innovation, then I've done my job."
I don't know what to say. I think right now we are seeing more of a democratic or open spaces in terms of that theater can really exist anywhere, and people are being drawn to those other spaces, and artists and storytellers from those other spaces are really getting on their voice and feeling more entitled and empowered to tell their stories and to tell to write the dramas that they want to write. And so I think it is bringing this great fresh new excitement into the possibilities of theater, even if it may not be located in, again, what we traditionally know as the theater world, theater spaces, but there's theater happening everywhere, and people are really seeking out, like, oh, well, what's happening at the library, right, or what's happening over here, that it wouldn't preclude them of going and attending to say, like, well, what, the soup kitchen? Well, I'm not going to go see arts in the soup kitchen, but now people will, right, and so I think that's what's exciting, and I'm seeing.
When I was a student studying in London, I saw a lot of theatre, and I go back and I sometimes watch whatever I can, and some of it reminds me of what I've seen earlier. I mean, if it's a Shakespeare play, if it's done out of the Globe or somewhere else. But I think one remarkable thing that's changed is just the stagecraft. I mean, thank God for the engineers. They've just pushed what you see on stage remarkably. So I think this is, to my mind, I mean, I know this is a prosaic response, but it is significant. And sometimes we ignore this. We don't pay enough attention to the fact that there's just incredible things happening on stage simply because of science and architecture and the way things move around.
Actually, I completely agree, and I a few years ago I saw this play called I Am My Own Wife in New York. It's one of my favorite plays, and it's exactly what you're talking about, the stagecraft, the lighting, everything was so precise, but it did not stand out. It did not in any way interfere with the humanity of the play or the telling of the story. And when technology makes things more human, that is amazing. And you're absolutely right, it has to be mentioned. Something like that.
I think they're the unsung heroes of.
Absolutely. Yeah, they are.
Questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, my question is, he was talking about the quality of the theater, right? So what I'm trying to understand is, when you have theater, there are different genre of theater, whether it is just comedy, political satire, or whatever. So I'm sure everybody's specialized in those buckets. So when you do that, what should be the balance of conveying that message? What is the morals of the story versus the performance of the stage, the lighting, and that sort of theater goods?
Who wants to?
I don't think any writer specifies in any genre, so I'll write a comedy, I'll write a drama, I'll write a political satire. That doesn't come in, I don't.
But I think the question that he's asking is, what's the balance when you're writing the play between comedy and drama, etc., and the technical process of it? What's the balance? Is there a balance when you're writing, or when you're?
Or in the other question, in the other sense, how important it is to convey the message versus just making it appealing to the audience?
Message versus popularity.
Oh,
Does it have to have a message?
Well,
I think
no, I think the answer is no. I think great art does not need to have a message at all. And I didn't say that, that's Orwell. Not morality and not meaning or anything like that. Art stands on its own. And Shakespeare, Hamlet is maybe the most famous tragedy of all times. It's a very funny play. If you look at the graves digger scene, you couldn't be funnier, while you're also dealing probably with one of the most strongest scenes about death in the history of theaters.
the best messages in a play is actually what you take away. So the best play is that you have a multiplicity of messages. So in Rashomon, you actually saw the play, 7 people took 7 different messages away from that play. So you open it up to the viewer. So the viewer is the invisible character in this performance, because he or she finally will take from that staging of the play what he or she wishes to, and he or she wishes to interpret out of the room. And then it'll live on differently from what it does on stage or in a book, as a publication.
I'll just say I did a play, an Israeli play about 3 Palestinian brothers under the Intifada, and the first uprising of the Palestinians. We did it in New York. And at the end of the play, I was with my Palestinian buddies, the cast, and a couple of audience members told me that it was a great play because it showed how barbaric they are. So the message that I thought that I was conveying certainly did not get to that, and I can't get, I wouldn't even want to try to manipulate that. You just do the piece as best you can.
So on a follow-up question, when you do plays for, let's say, 1,000 times, which runs over years, as a writer or as a director, how do you make twists so that the play can sustain that life?
Well, I'll just add one more thing to this idea of the message. Literature, whether it's a play or a novel, in my opinion, is not there for a message. It's meant to create some sort of disturbance. It's meant to unsettle the audience or the reader, to in a way cause a dent in your consciousness. So you go on a search. So questions are more valuable. Sometimes you might in a play, the audience is completely transfixed, but inside they're shifting because something is unsettling them, and that's what I really look for. And in terms of longevity, I think if you look at all the great plays, again it goes back to, it touches a part of us that is deeply, deeply human. Something that is topical, that is of the moment, doesn't last. But human nature is universal and human nature is eternal. And that's what we look for as a playwright.
His other question.
I would just say that things that are topical can last. I just would disagree with that, and that's all. But the play I was doing post 9/11, 16 years later, I'm reviving. Now, you're not only talking about a decade and a half. However, there are ways in which we can take things that might be really topical or very much rooted in a certain context and continue to make them universal. Because, I mean, even though we always talk about Shakespeare as universal, it is very highly contextualized. Yet, you know, in a refugee camp, people can do theater and it's the Shakespeare play, and it's completely meaningful to the people doing it and the people seeing it. And so, you know, that I'm just, you know,
the other question that he had is, how do you keep a play fresh after 1,000 shows? Anybody?
I wish I had a play that played 1,000. That's not true. Wow. Well, that's the fun of you play for your partners, from your partners, and with for and from your audience, and you make it. You know, that's the magic of theater that I've attributed.
I mean, what I've done. I mean, there's a musical that continues to tour, which is about 630 shows old. What I do is every season I go in and change some of the lines. The story remains the same, but given who the characters are and if it's being recast, I go in there as per the contract and I say, okay, if it's in Egypt, this is what it should be. Or if it's in America, this is what it could be. And if it's in Austria, this is what it is. So two quick questions. One I think Senator Presta wanted to ask and you wanted to ask. So yeah.
Yes.
Well, as a theater goer in the U.S. for the last 30 years, it seems like we're in a death spiral when you look at the size, the audiences for things that aren't the 1,000th revival of West Side Story. It's diminishing for new contemporary stories, and then look at the age of the audiences. When you look around the world, is live theater in a death spiral in other countries?
So let's hold that question. Is live theater a death spiral in other countries? And
yes, if you were trying to write your first play, where do you go to get training? For example, a novel, you can go to the Iowa Writers Workshop and pay them $20,000 and teach how to write a novel. But, is there a school for playwriting for beginners?
Who wants to do that?
I'm not trained.
There's a number of schools. There's a number of schools. There's a number of institutions that look at new writing. The Royal Court Theatre, Travers Theatre, they commission, they help, they work with you. I'm not sure about America. I know that Columbia has a program. I know that Yale has a program. NYU has a program. UCLA has a program. How much
they just write.
Yeah.
Write, read and write.
Read and write.
And that's the great thing about plays is that they are dynamic. They're meant to be spoken. So do a scene. Get some of your friends to read it out loud. I like to work with non-actors in some of the first readings because actors can work with bad or funny sentences and they'll fix it. And so I won't be able to hear where it really actually sounds awkward. So I like to work with non-actors. Just do a scene at a time. And a scene at a time will get you a play.
And is theatre in the other parts of the world a death spiral? This is a very reluctant.
Well, I don't think so. I think when there's a hunger to tell stories, young people are extremely hungry to tell stories. I mean, when you spoke about that young person who came up to you and said, I could hear myself for the first time, theatre is a remarkable way for young people to tell stories, to discover their own narrative, to engage with the world. So I don't think there's, people spoke about the death of the novel many years ago. The novel is still thriving, and I think theatre will continue to thrive. It's just, you take it in new directions.
I mean, just to add to him, in countries or spaces where there is conflict, and it doesn't have to be physical conflict or war, but they can be conflict on morality or conflict within society or inequity, etc. You will see the essence of storytelling coming to the fore because people want to be able to tell that story of conflict. And we are seeing this more and more in most parts of the world. Perhaps sometimes in safe societies, I have found that the telling of a tale which basically, stays within a safe context is a problem. So in America, I think, given the present scenario, you will have a whole rich outpouring of theatre, of independent theatre, going out into the future. So one question there and one question, and then we have to stop. We'll be carrying on.
the young people that I know who are learning to write, who are actively writing, are writing for the internet.
Yeah.
Has the internet begun to affect the way you work, or have you thought about where you're going to be as a result of the impact of the internet?
Anybody?
You want to take a second question?
A second question?
In relation to theatre, is that?
Mine was not a question, it was just a comment.
Oh, so let's just hold that comment and just go back to the question.
If it's in relation to theatre, I think you should be addressing this to one of them. Is it generally writing or?
This is dramatic writing, this is dialogue, this is, but they're bypassing publishing. They don't see the value of publishing anything on paper though, and they're bypassing the stage. They're going directly to the internet.
But then people read it. The reading a play is not, is not a play is a situation where there's an audience and there's somebody performing it.
Are you talking about web series?
No, he's just saying that if you're writing today, how has writing online changed this whole
I don't think
staging?
online, it hasn't changed playwriting as much as it may have changed other types of creative writing. What I thought was really interesting, some years ago I was reading how young Japanese people were doing mini novels through kind of texts and through these things, and so people would get, you don't have that with playwriting. People are not looking, to read something on a device related to a performance piece like a play. They would look for other types of creative writing, creative storytelling.
But these are mostly staged productions, film productions. Most of them are, going in and coming out of film school, but they're seeing all the problems that you've experienced in the theater and trying to avoid it completely.
Well, I'd say this, in terms of the publication, that's right, the internet is a forum to kind of put your work out there and maybe get somebody to read it. There's a big difference between anything to do with screen and anything to do with stage. There was mention of danger earlier. I think the major danger that we're coming to the theater for is that maybe the actor will screw up. And we really want to know. We want to have that opportunity. The live aspect that it really could go wrong is what is going to draw us to the community.
The captivating energy of a live performance, I don't think will ever be replaced. It's like, you all could have bought these books and not come here for any conversation. This conversation or any of the conversations, or Suki Kim's conversation earlier today, was immediate. There was an exchange of energy, which, however beautifully a theatrical production is filmed, never captures that exchange of energy that you see when you go to see a great musical or a great play or even a crappy play. You still come away with a crappy energy, but I'm going to kill that playwright and I'm going to kill that actor, and you're really worked up, as opposed to seeing it on a screen and you'll fast forward and you'll kill it in 35 seconds. So I think that's the big, and we're going to end with the comment, and I hope it's
No pressure, no pressure.
I think I just had I've forgotten already. I think I just had a comment about, the 1,000, what are the South Pacifics or Sound Pieces or whatever you're talking about. And kids look at rap, slam poetry, hip hop. Kids are doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
And it isn't necessarily theater as we old folk know it, but they are doing live work.
Yeah.
And that work conveys whatever it is that they're thinking about and caring about, and I think we can't forget that.
But that is also theater. That is theater.
Exactly what I'm saying.
And on that happy note, thank you all very much. Thank you.